The sun-scorched plains of Wyoming territory stretched out like an endless sea of golden grass. But for Teresa Crawford, they only served as a reminder of how far she had come and how little she had left. The year was 1876, and the dust of her husband's grave had barely settled when she arrived at Broken Spoke Ranch with nothing but a trunk of belongings, a stubborn will, and the deed to what had once been her cousin's prosperous cattle operation. Teresa pulled the rickety wagon to a halt, her worn leather gloves gripping the reins as she surveyed what was supposed to be her salvation. What stood before her instead was a nightmare of neglect, a two-story ranch house with peeling paint and a sagging porch, a barn that looked one strong wind away from collapse, and fences that had given up their duty of containing cattle long ago. "This can't be right," she whispered, her voice carrying across the empty yard where weeds grew tall enough to tickle a horse's belly. But it was right. This was Broken Spoke Ranch, the inheritance her cousin Jacob had left her in his will, the place she had pinned her hopes on after losing everything back in Missouri. Teresa had never seen the ranch in person, only heard Jacob's exaggerated tales of its prosperity in his infrequent letters. Now she understood why he'd stopped writing altogether in the last year before his passing. She climbed down from the wagon, her boots landing with a soft thud in the dirt. At 32, Teresa was no stranger to hard work or disappointment. Widowed twice, first by the war that took her first husband, then by the fever that claimed Robert Crawford just 6 months ago, she had learned that life rarely dealt a fair hand, especially to women. As she approached the main house, a figure emerged from the barn, tall, broad-shouldered, with a weathered Stetson pulled low over his eyes. "Madam," the man called out, his stride purposeful as he crossed the yard, "you've taken a wrong turn. Nothing for you here." Teresa straightened her spine, standing her full height, which wasn't much against his towering frame. "I believe you're mistaken. I'm Teresa Crawford. This ranch belonged to my cousin Jacob, and now it belongs to me." The man stopped short, pushing his hat back to reveal a face that might have been handsome once, before the sun and hardship had carved deep lines around his eyes and mouth. He was older than she'd first thought. Maybe early 40s, with hair the color of wheat streaked with silver at the temples. "Quincy Sutton," he said after a long moment. "I was your cousin's foreman. What's left of it anyway?" "What's left of what, Mr. Sutton? The ranch or the position?" A hint of something amusement perhaps flickered across his face. "Both, I reckon. Jacob's been gone nearly 4 months. Most of the hands left when the money ran out. It's just me and 2 others now." Teresa glanced around, taking in the extent of the decay. "And the cattle?" "Down to about 60 head. Wolf attacks took some. Had to sell others to keep food on the table for the men who stayed loyal." She felt the weight of disappointment settle in her chest but refused to let it show. "Well, Mr. Sutton, I appreciate your loyalty. I intend to restore this ranch, and I'll need experienced men to help me do it." Quincy Sutton's gaze traveled over her, the simple dress, the hands that, while not soft, were certainly not those of someone who'd worked cattle. "No disrespect, Mrs. Crawford, but ranching isn't ladies' work, especially not out here. Wyoming's no place for a woman alone." Teresa smiled, but there was steel in it. "I wasn't asking for your permission, Mr. Sutton. I was informing you of my plans. Now, if you'd be so kind as to show me to the house, I'd like to see what else requires my immediate attention." The surprise on his face was almost worth the journey. Almost. The interior of the ranch house was marginally better than its exterior, though it bore the unmistakable signs of bachelor living: discarded boots by the door, empty whiskey bottles on the sideboard, and a layer of dust thick enough to write in. But the structure was sound. The roof didn't leak, as far as she could tell, and the stone fireplace stood ready to warm the coming winter nights. "The other men, where are they?" Teresa asked as she moved through the rooms, mentally cataloging what needed to be cleaned, repaired, or replaced. Pete Wilkins is out checking the north fence line. Kid named Charlie Evans is in town picking up supplies, what little we could afford. Quincy remained in the doorway of each room, as if reluctant to intrude on her inspection. "And where have you been sleeping?" "Bunkhouse with the others. Your cousin's room is upstairs, untouched since—" He trailed off, but Teresa understood. "Thank you for that courtesy, at least." She ran a finger along the edge of a wooden table, leaving a clean line in the dust. "I'll need to know everything what we have, what we need, how much money is left." Quincy shifted uncomfortably. "That's just it, Mrs. Crawford. There isn't any money left. Jacob was a good man, but not much of a businessman. Had big dreams but poor execution. The bank's been threatening foreclosure for months." Teresa felt her carefully constructed composure begin to crack. She'd sold everything to get here, spent her last savings on the journey. There was nowhere else to go. "I see," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Then we'll simply have to make do with what we have until we can turn things around." Quincy let out a short, humorless laugh. "No offense, but how do you plan to do that? Winter's coming in a few months. The cattle we have left won't fetch enough to see us through, and we can't risk slaughtering too many if we want to rebuild the herd." Teresa turned to face him fully, chin lifted. "I may not know much about cattle, Mr. Sutton, but I know about survival. My father ran a small farm before the war. I helped my first husband build a mercantile from nothing, and I nursed my second husband through his illness while managing our household accounts to the penny." She took a breath. "I'm a quick learner, and I'm not afraid of hard work." Something in Quincy's expression shifted, not quite respect, but perhaps a willingness to reserve judgment. "You'll need more than determination, Mrs. Crawford. This country breaks men who've spent their whole lives preparing for its challenges." "Then it's fortunate I'm not a man, isn't it?" She offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to rest before unpacking my things. It's been a long journey." After Quincy left, Teresa allowed herself the luxury of sitting down at the kitchen table, letting her shoulders slump for just a moment. The enormity of what she faced threatened to overwhelm her. But after allowing herself exactly 1 minute of doubt, she stood, squared her shoulders, and began to clean. Dawn broke over the eastern horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold as Teresa stepped onto the porch. She'd risen early, determined to establish a routine from her first full day at Broken Spoke. The cool morning air filled her lungs as she began to sing softly at first, then with growing confidence as the familiar hymn rose to greet the new day. "Amazing Grace," how sweet the sound. Her voice carried across the yard, clear and true. She didn't immediately notice Quincy approaching from the bunkhouse, stopping short when he heard her. He stood, coffee cup in hand, listening as she continued to the second verse. When she finished, he cleared his throat. Teresa turned, startled to find him there. "Mr. Sutton, good morning." "Mrs. Crawford." He nodded, an unreadable expression on his face. "Didn't take you for a singer." "My mother always sang to greet the day. Said it set the right tone." Teresa smoothed her apron, suddenly self-conscious. "I've made breakfast if you and the others are hungry." Surprise flickered across his features. "You didn't have to do that." "I know, but we need to talk about the ranch, and I've found men are more agreeable on a full stomach." The hint of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Can't argue with that logic." Breakfast was a simple affair: biscuits, gravy, and eggs from the few chickens that still scratched in the yard, but the three men ate as if it were a feast. Teresa had met Charlie Evans the previous evening, a gangly youth of 19 with eager eyes and a perpetual blush whenever she addressed him directly. Pete Wilkins was older, perhaps 50, with a weathered face and few words to spare. "Mrs. Crawford says she wants to know everything about the ranch," Quincy said between bites. Figured you two might have insights I've missed. Pete grunted. Fence lines shot to hell on the north side. That's how we keep losing cattle to wolves and rustlers. Would take a week of solid work and more lumber than we've got to fix it proper. And the well pump's been sticking something awful, Charlie added. Takes twice as long to get water up. Teresa listened, making mental notes. What about our neighbors? Any who might be willing to trade labor for goods? The three men exchanged glances. Nearest neighbor is the Harding place, about 5 miles east, Quincy finally said. But old man Harding's been looking to buy this land cheap since Jacob took ill. He won't be inclined to help. The Mendoza family to the south are good folks, Charlie offered. They run sheep, though, not cattle. Which means Harding hates them too, Pete added. Teresa considered this. And to the west? Nothing but open range for 20 miles, then the mountains, Quincy said. North is Blackwater Creek, too rocky for much grazing. So we're isolated, Teresa concluded, all the more reason to be self-sufficient. Charlie, you mentioned going to town yesterday. How far is it? 12 miles, madam. Little place called Prosperity, though it ain't living up to its name these days. Teresa nodded. I'd like to go there today. See what resources are available. Quincy frowned. I don't think that's wise yet. You just arrived, and town can be rough. Nevertheless, Mr. Sutton, I need to establish credit with the merchants if we're to get supplies. Besides, I should introduce myself to the banker who's so eager to take this place. There was a determined set to her jaw that brooked no argument. Quincy recognized it and sighed. Fine, but I'm going with you. I can take care of myself. No doubt, but a woman traveling alone draws attention and not the kind you want. Besides, the wagon needs 2 people to load supplies, if you manage to secure any. Teresa couldn't argue with that logic. Very well, we'll leave in an hour. The town of Prosperity consisted of one main street with false-fronted buildings on either side, a general store, a saloon, a small bank, a livery, and a handful of other establishments that seemed to be barely clinging to existence. Dust swirled in the street as Teresa and Quincy drove the wagon to the hitching post outside the general store. Not much to look at, Teresa remarked. Used to be livelier before the mine north of here played out, Quincy said, helping her down from the wagon. Now it survives on the ranches in the area and the occasional cattle drive passing through. Several men lounging outside the saloon paused their conversation to stare as Teresa walked past. She kept her head high, ignoring their whispers and Quincy's protective stance slightly behind her. The general store was cool and dim after the bright sunlight. An older man with spectacles perched on his nose looked up from behind the counter. Can I help you folks? His eyes widened slightly as he recognized Quincy. Sutton, didn't expect to see you in town so soon after last time. Things have changed, Morris. This is Mrs. Teresa Crawford, Jacob's cousin. She's taken over the ranch. Morris adjusted his spectacles, studying Teresa with newfound interest. Is that so? Well, welcome to Prosperity, Mrs. Crawford, though I'm afraid you've inherited a heap of trouble with that place. So I'm discovering, Mr. Morris, but I intend to turn it around. She approached the counter. I understand my cousin had an account here. Morris's expression turned apologetic. Had being the operative word, madam. I had to close it when the bills went unpaid. Nothing personal, just business. I understand completely. I'd like to open a new account, with more modest terms to start. The storekeeper glanced at Quincy, then back to Teresa. With all due respect, Mrs. Crawford, I'd need some assurance you can pay. The bank's been saying that ranch will be theirs by winter. Teresa straightened her spine. Mr. Morris, I'm a woman of my word. I'm proposing a limited account for essentials only, with payment due at the end of each month. If I fail to pay, you cut me off. Seems a fair arrangement for both of us. And what do you have to offer as collateral in the meantime? Teresa removed a small velvet pouch from her reticule and placed it on the counter. From it, she extracted a gold brooch set with small pearls. This was my mother's. It should cover any reasonable expenses for the first month while we establish trust. Morris picked up the brooch, examining it in the light. This is fine workmanship. It is, and I'd like it back when I settle our first month's account. After a moment's consideration, Morris nodded. All right, Mrs. Crawford. We'll start small and see how it goes. Teresa smiled. Excellent. Now I need supplies. Flour, sugar, coffee, and whatever vegetables you have that are still fresh. Also nails, hammer heads, and lumber if you stock it. As Morris gathered the items, the bell over the door jingled. A tall man in an expensive suit entered, followed by two rough-looking companions. The atmosphere in the store immediately tensed. Well, well, the man said, his voice carrying the practiced smoothness of someone used to getting his way. Quincy Sutton. Didn't expect to see Broken Spoke's last loyal dog in town so soon. Quincy's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice even. Harding. Teresa turned to face the newcomer, instantly understanding this must be the neighbor who coveted their land. And who might this be? Harding asked, his gaze sliding over Teresa in a way that made her skin crawl. Teresa Crawford, she answered before Quincy could. Jacob's cousin and the new owner of Broken Spoke Ranch. Harding's eyebrows rose. Is that so? Jacob never mentioned family coming to claim his debts. Interesting development. He removed his hat in a gesture that might have been polite if not for the calculating look in his eyes. Victor Harding, madam. Largest cattle operation in the county. How fortunate for you, Teresa replied coolly. I look forward to being good neighbors, Mr. Harding. He laughed, a sound without humor. Neighborly is my middle name, Mrs. Crawford. In fact, I'd be happy to take that failing ranch off your hands. Save you the trouble of watching it collapse around you this winter. That's very considerate, but I'm not interested in selling. Harding's smile dimmed. You might want to reconsider. Woman alone, no experience. Wyoming territory isn't kind to the unprepared. So I've been told. Repeatedly. And yet, here I stand. She turned back to Morris. I believe we were discussing my order? Harding's face darkened at the dismissal. Don't say I didn't warn you, he said, voice hardening. That land will be mine one way or another. Just a matter of time. After he left, Teresa released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. You just made an enemy, Quincy said quietly. From the sound of it, Broken Spoke already had one. She met his eyes steadily. I don't scare easily, Mr. Sutton. Something like respect flickered in his gaze. No, madam. I can see that you don't. The next stop was the bank, where Teresa's reception was even chillier. The banker, a pompous man named Ellsworth, made no attempt to hide his skepticism. Mrs. Crawford, while I sympathize with your situation, the fact remains that your cousin left this bank holding considerable paper on that property. We've been more than patient, but business is business. How much does the ranch owe exactly? Teresa asked. When Ellsworth named the figure, Teresa felt her heart sink. It was far more than she had anticipated. I see. And what are your terms for repayment? The banker steepled his fingers. Given the circumstances, I'm prepared to give you until the first snowfall to either pay the debt in full or vacate the property. The first snowfall could be in 2 months, Quincy protested. That's not nearly enough time. It's more than generous considering the situation, Ellsworth countered. Unless Mrs. Crawford has resources I'm unaware of? Teresa kept her expression neutral despite the panic fluttering in her chest. I'll need to review the ranch's assets before making any commitments, Mr. Ellsworth. I'd like copies of all outstanding loans and terms. Of course, the banker said, clearly not expecting her to make any headway. My clerk will prepare them before you leave. Outside, Quincy's face was grim. Jacob was in deeper than I thought. Yes. Teresa climbed into the wagon, mind racing. But every problem has a solution. We just need to find this one. Mrs. Crawford Teresa, Quincy said, his voice gentler than she'd heard it before. There might not be a solution this time. That ranch has been bleeding money for years. She turned to him, determination hardening her resolve. There's always a solution, Mr. Sutton. Always. We just need to think differently. The ride back to the ranch was mostly silent, both lost in thought. As they crested the hill that overlooked Broken Spoke, Teresa found herself seeing it with new eyes, not just the disrepair, but the potential. The land itself was beautiful, with rolling grasslands perfect for grazing and a creek cutting through the eastern section. Tell me about the land, she said suddenly. What makes it special? What did Jacob love about it? Quincy seemed surprised by the question. Well, the water rights are solid. That creek never runs dry, even in drought years. Soil's good for growing hay. And there's a box canyon on the north side that's perfect for keeping cattle sheltered during winter storms. Teresa nodded, formulating the beginnings of a plan. What about the forest to the west? There's timber there, isn't there? Yes, though we haven't harvested much. Jacob always meant to set up a small sawmill, but never got around to it. So we have water, grassland, and timber, Teresa mused. What else did Jacob raise besides cattle? Not much. Some chickens. Had a few hogs at one point. What about crops? Any fields under cultivation? Quincy shook his head. Jacob was a cattleman through and through, said farming was beneath him. Teresa smiled. Well, I have no such pride. If we're going to save this ranch, we need to diversify. Starting tomorrow, I want to inspect every acre of this property. There must be something we're overlooking. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity. True to her word, Teresa rode out with Quincy every day, learning the boundaries of her property, assessing its strengths and weaknesses. She was a quick study, asking intelligent questions and absorbing information like a sponge. She also instituted changes that raised eyebrows but gradually earned respect. Each morning began with her singing on the porch hymns mostly, but occasionally folk songs that spoke of love and loss and perseverance. The men initially found it strange, but soon it became a signal to start the day, a moment of beauty before the hard work began. Teresa turned the neglected kitchen garden into a productive plot, salvaging what vegetables she could and planting quick-growing greens for the coming weeks. She set up a regular schedule for cleaning the main house, enlisted Charlie's help in repairing the chicken coops, and even convinced Pete to teach her how to mend fences. But it was her relationship with Quincy that underwent the most noticeable transformation. What had begun as skepticism on his part and determination on hers gradually evolved into something resembling partnership. He found himself looking forward to their daily rides, impressed by her resilience and increasingly charmed by her dry wit. "You're not what I expected," he admitted one evening as they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the sky in spectacular colors. "What did you expect?" Teresa asked, hands busy with mending. "Someone who'd take one look at this place and run for the hills, or someone who'd try to run it from the parlor without getting their hands dirty." She laughed. "I've never had the luxury of clean hands, Mr. Sutton. I think after a month of working side by side, you might call me Quincy." Teresa's needle paused. "All right then, Quincy. And I'm Teresa." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the chorus of crickets starting their evening song. "Your morning singing," Quincy said abruptly. "It reminds me of my mother. She used to sing when I was a boy. Haven't thought about that in years." Teresa smiled. "My mother believed music could heal anything broken spirits, broken homes, broken hearts." Wise woman. She was. Teresa set aside her mending. "Tell me about your family. You've never mentioned them." Quincy's face closed slightly. Not much to tell. Parents died when I was young. Raised by my uncle until I was old enough to make my own way. Been drifting from ranch to ranch most of my life. Until Broken spoke? He nodded. Jacob was a good boss. Treated men fairly. When things started going downhill, couldn't bring myself to leave him in the lurch. His gaze met hers. What about you? You mentioned 2 husbands. Teresa looked out at the darkening landscape. First was Thomas, childhood sweetheart. We married right before he left for the war. He never came home. She paused. Robert was different, older, established. A kind man who needed a wife to help run his household. We had respect and companionship, if not passion. And no children? A shadow crossed her face. No. It seems that's not in God's plan for me. Quincy wanted to reach for her hand but restrained himself. Instead, he changed the subject. That field you wanted cleared for planting Pete and Charlie finished it today. Good. I want to get winter wheat in as soon as possible. It won't solve all our problems, but it's a start. Speaking of problems, Harding was sniffing around our north boundary yesterday. Teresa frowned. Again? That's the 3rd time this month. He's persistent, I'll give him that. Persistent men don't frighten me, she said, with a slight smile. Quincy found himself returning the smile. No, I don't imagine much does frighten you, Teresa Crawford. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither was ready to name. Finally, Teresa stood. Well, tomorrow comes early, especially with my morning concert. Good night, Quincy. Good night, Teresa. As October painted the surrounding hills in fiery hues of red and gold, Broken Spoke began to show signs of revival. The most obvious physical changes were the repaired barn roof, the freshly painted house, and the new fences enclosing fat chickens and the start of a kitchen garden that would feed them through winter. But the most significant change was invisible, a sense of purpose that energized everyone on the property. Teresa had instituted weekly planning meetings where all 4 of them discussed priorities and problems. Today's meeting had just concluded with a review of their finances, still dire, but no longer quite so hopeless. The arrangement with the Mendozas is working well, Teresa said, referring to their new bartering system with the sheep farming family to the south. Teresa's medical knowledge learned during her 2nd marriage had proven valuable when the Mendozas' youngest son fell ill, and in gratitude, they had offered wool and cheese in exchange for access to Broken Spokes Creek. And Charlie's uncle agreed to buy all the timber we can cut this winter for his furniture shop in Laramie, Quincy added. It won't be enough to pay off the bank, but it's something. Pete, who had initially been the most skeptical of Teresa's leadership, nodded approvingly. The new bull should improve our calving numbers come spring, too. The bull had been Teresa's most daring investment, purchased with the last of her personal savings after she discovered their existing bull was too old to effectively sire calves. The risk had raised eyebrows, but no one questioned her authority now. We're making progress, Teresa agreed, but we still need to convince Ellsworth to extend our deadline. The first snow could come any day now. I could ride to town tomorrow, Charlie offered. Need supplies anyway. Thank you, Charlie. I think this time I need to go myself. Ellsworth responds better to face-to-face negotiations. Quincy frowned. I don't like the idea of you going alone. Harding's been in town a lot lately, talking to anyone who'll listen about how Broken Spoke is on its last legs. Then you'll just have to accompany me again, Teresa said with a smile that did strange things to Quincy's insides. We make a good team. The compliment shouldn't have warmed him as much as it did. After Pete and Charlie left to continue their chores, Quincy lingered in the kitchen where Teresa was kneading dough for bread. There's something else we need to discuss, he said, watching her capable hands work the dough with practiced movements. Rustlers hit the Peterson place last night, took 20 head. Teresa's hands stilled. How far is the Peterson ranch? About 15 miles south. Too close for comfort. Do you think we're at risk? Quincy leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. Hard to say. We don't have much worth taking, but that might make us an easier target. I've asked Pete to double the night checks, but with just 3 of us. We're spread thin. Teresa finished for him. She resumed kneading, her movements more forceful. Could we hire more hands? Not without money. What about shares? Offer a percentage of the spring calves instead of wages? Quincy considered this. Might work for 1 or 2 men willing to take a gamble. I know some good cowboys who might be between jobs. Then let's do it. Ride out tomorrow after we visit the bank. See who you can find. Yes, madam, Quincy said with a hint of a smile. Teresa gave him a mock glare. I thought we were past madam. Old habits. His smile widened. The bread smells good. It'll be better with the stew I've got simmering. She nodded toward the pot on the stove. Would you mind checking if it needs more salt? My hands are covered in flour. Quincy moved to the stove, lifting the lid to release a cloud of fragrant steam. He took the spoon Teresa had left nearby, tasted the stew, and added a pinch of salt. Perfect, he declared after another taste. The secret is time, Teresa said, forming the dough into loaves. Most people don't use enough. Is that so? He replaced the lid, suddenly aware of how domestic the scene was, the 2 of them in the warm kitchen as evening approached, discussing dinner preparations as if they'd been doing it for years. Teresa seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere. Her cheeks colored slightly as she placed the loaves in pans. It's nice, isn't it? Having a proper meal to look forward to at the end of the day. It is. Quincy hesitated, then added softly, This place feels like a home again. That's your doing. Their eyes met across the kitchen, and for a moment, neither spoke. The connection between them had been growing steadily through shared work, shared meals, shared purpose. But both had been carefully avoiding acknowledging it. The moment was broken by Charlie's voice calling from outside. Quincy cleared his throat and stepped back. I should see what he needs. Teresa nodded, turning her attention back to her bread. Dinner in an hour. I'll be there. As he walked out into the yard, Quincy admitted to himself what he'd been denying for weeks. He was falling in love with Teresa Crawford, her strength, her determination, her morning songs, and the way she'd brought life back to Broken Spoke. The realization should have terrified him, but instead, it filled him with a strange, unfamiliar hope. The trip to town the next day brought mixed results. Ellsworth reluctantly agreed to extend their deadline until Christmas, giving them 2 more months to either pay or vacate. It wasn't the victory Teresa had hoped for, but it was better than nothing. What they hadn't anticipated was encountering Victor Harding outside the bank, flanked by his usual entourage of hired men. Mrs. Crawford? Harding said with exaggerated politeness, still hanging on to that failing ranch, I see. Mr. Harding, Teresa acknowledged coolly. Broken Spoke is doing quite well. Thank you for your concern. Harding's smile didn't reach his eyes. Is it? That's not what I hear. Word is, Ellsworth is just counting down the days until he can foreclose. You shouldn't believe everything you hear, Quincy interjected. No? Harding turned his attention to Quincy. Well, here's something you should believe, Sutton. That woman's got you and those other fools working for promises she can't keep. When winter hits and there's no money for wages, you'll wish you'd jumped ship while you could. Teresa stepped forward, placing herself slightly in front of Quincy. My arrangements with my employees are none of your concern, Mr. Harding. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have business to attend to. She moved to step around him, but one of Harding's men shifted to block her path. Quincy's hand immediately went to the pistol at his hip. I wouldn't, he warned, voice low and dangerous. Tension crackled in the air until Harding finally gestured for his man to step aside. This isn't over, Harding said as Teresa and Quincy passed. That land will be mine by Christmas. Not while I'm breathing, Teresa replied without looking back. Once they were out of earshot, Quincy murmured, "He's getting desperate." "Good. Desperate men make mistakes." Quincy couldn't help but admire her composure. "You don't seem worried." "Oh, I'm worried," she admitted, "but showing it won't help. Besides, I've dealt with bullies before. They feed on fear." Their next stop was the saloon, where Quincy hoped to find experienced cowboys willing to work for shares, rather than wages. Teresa waited in the wagon, ignoring the curious stares of passers-by, while Quincy went inside. He emerged half an hour later with a satisfied expression. "Found 2 men willing to start next week. Brothers named Tyler and Mason Reed. Worked the Chisholm Trail 3 seasons. Good with cattle and handy with repairs." "That's wonderful news." Teresa's smile lit up her face. "With 5 men, we can properly secure the ranch and make real progress on improvements." "If we can feed 2 more mouths through winter," Quincy reminded her, though he was caught up in her enthusiasm. "We'll manage. The root cellar is nearly full, and we've got enough preserved meat to last if we're careful." She hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about Christmas." "Christmas?" Quincy raised an eyebrow as he climbed into the wagon beside her. "Yes. I know it might seem frivolous given our circumstances, but I think we need something to look forward to. A proper celebration to thank everyone for their hard work and faith in Broken Spoke." The idea of Christmas with Teresa, of seeing her face in the warm glow of candlelight, of sharing that day of joy with her, created a longing so intense it almost hurt. "I think that's a fine idea," he said softly. They were halfway back to the ranch when the first snowflakes began to fall fat. Lazy flakes that danced on the breeze before disappearing into the dirt road. "Winter's here," Teresa said, looking up at the gray sky. "Just a dusting," Quincy assured her. "The real storms won't come for a few weeks yet." But as they continued, the snow fell faster, the flakes smaller and more numerous. By the time the ranch came into view, a thin white blanket covered the ground, and the temperature had dropped noticeably. "We should hurry," Quincy said, urging the horses to a faster pace. "I don't like the look of those clouds." They had just reached the barn when the wind picked up, driving the snow horizontally. Quincy helped Teresa down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist longer than necessary. "Get inside where it's warm," he told her. "I'll take care of the horses and wagon." "I can help." "Teresa." His voice was firm but gentle. "This weather can turn dangerous quickly. Go start a fire in the house. I'll be there soon." Something in his tone, concern mixed with authority, made her nod in agreement. As she hurried toward the house, Quincy watched her go, struck by how much things had changed since her arrival. The ranch that had been dying under Jacob's neglect was finding new life under Teresa's care. And Quincy, who had resigned himself to a solitary existence, was discovering feelings he'd thought long buried. By evening, the early winter storm had intensified into a full blizzard. Wind howled around the corners of the house, snow piled against the windows, and the temperature plummeted. But inside, Teresa had created a haven of warmth and comfort. The fireplace blazed, oil lamps cast a golden glow, and the scent of beef stew simmered on the stove. Pete and Charlie had made it back from their chores just before the worst hit, and now all 4 of them sat around the kitchen table, playing cards and listening to the storm rage outside. "Never seen snow this early," Pete commented, arranging his cards. "Bad sign for the winter ahead." "Or good luck," Teresa countered. "Getting the first storm over with early might mean a milder season overall." Charlie laughed. "Always finding the bright side, ain't you, Mrs. Crawford?" "Someone has to," she replied with a smile, laying down her cards. "Besides, we're prepared. The cattle are in the sheltered pasture, the barn is stocked with hay, and we have enough firewood to last a month." Quincy watched her, admiring the way she boosted morale without dismissing legitimate concerns. It was a delicate balance, and she managed it masterfully. When the card game ended, Pete and Charlie bid them goodnight, bundling up to make the short dash to the bunkhouse despite Teresa's offer to let them sleep in the house. "Wouldn't be proper," Pete said with a nod toward Teresa. "Besides, the bunkhouse is plenty warm with the new stove you ordered." After they left, Teresa and Quincy found themselves alone in the kitchen. She busied herself clearing away cups and cards while he added another log to the fire. "You should get some rest," he said, watching her stifle a yawn. "It's been a long day." In a moment, she sat at the table again, gesturing for him to join her. "First, I want to discuss something with you." Quincy sat across from her, curious. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about our situation, the deadline with the bank, Harding's threats, everything." She met his gaze steadily. "If the worst happens and we can't keep the ranch, I want you to know I'll make sure you, Pete, and Charlie are taken care of. You'll get references and whatever wages I can manage." The thought of Teresa leaving of Broken Spoke without her morning songs and quiet strength hit Quincy like a physical blow. "It won't come to that," he said more forcefully than he'd intended. "I hope not. But I believe in facing reality, however unpleasant." She smiled slightly. "It's what's kept me going through, well, everything life has thrown my way." Quincy found himself reaching across the table to take her hand. It was forward, perhaps even improper, but he couldn't stop himself. "Teresa, listen to me. This ranch was dying before you came. Now it has a chance. Not just because of the improvements or the new ventures, but because you've given it a heart again. You've given all of us something to believe in." Her fingers tightened around his. "That's kind of you to say. It's the truth." He took a deep breath, knowing he was crossing a line but unable to turn back. "And the truth is, I don't care about this ranch half as much as I care about you staying." Teresa's eyes widened, her lips parting in surprise. "Quincy, I know it's too soon. I know you came here for a fresh start. Not to find—" He hesitated, then forged ahead. "Not to find feelings for a weathered old cowboy with nothing to his name but loyalty and hard work. But there it is. I care for you, Teresa. More than I thought possible." The silence that followed seemed endless. Outside, the wind moaned around the eaves, and the fire crackled in the hearth. Finally, Teresa spoke, her voice soft but steady. "It's not too soon. Not when you've lived as much life as we have." Her free hand came up to touch his weathered cheek. "And you're wrong about what you have to offer. Loyalty and hard work are worth more than gold to me. They always have been." Quincy turned his face slightly to press a kiss to her palm, watching her eyes darken in response. "What are you saying, Teresa?" "I'm saying that saving this ranch has become more important to me than I ever expected, because it's become home. And you, Quincy Sutton, are a large part of the reason why." The confession hung between them, fragile and precious. Quincy stood slowly, still holding her hand, and drew her to her feet. Standing before the fireplace with snow falling in the darkness beyond the windows and warmth radiating from the hearth, he pulled her gently into his arms. "May I kiss you?" he asked, voice rough with emotion. Teresa's answer was to rise on her toes, her hands coming to rest on his shoulders as she pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepening as they both surrendered to feelings that had been building for weeks. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Quincy rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since I heard you singing that first morning." Teresa laughed softly. "And I've wanted you to, though I wouldn't have admitted it even to myself." They stood in each other's embrace as the fire burned low and the storm gradually quieted outside. There would be challenges ahead, the bank's deadline, Harding's threats, the harsh winter. But in that moment, both felt a certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. The weeks that followed brought both hardship and joy. The early winter storm gave way to a period of clear, cold days that allowed them to complete essential preparations before the next onslaught. The Reed brothers arrived as promised and proved to be valuable additions to their small team. Teresa and Quincy's relationship deepened, though they maintained proprieties for the sake of appearances. They still rode out together daily to check the herd and property boundaries. But now those rides included stolen moments of privacy conversations that ranged from childhood memories to dreams for the future. Hands clasped as they watched sunsets from hilltops, and kisses that grew more passionate with each passing day. The ranch itself continued its transformation. The new bull, a magnificent Hereford they named King, seemed to understand his important role in their future plans. The chickens, protected in their reinforced coop, produced eggs even as winter deepened, and Teresa's winter wheat lay dormant beneath the snow, a promise of spring income. But their financial situation remained precarious. Despite all their improvements and economies, they were still far short of what they needed to satisfy the bank. Christmas and their deadline approached with alarming speed. Then, 2 weeks before Christmas, an unexpected visitor arrived at Broken Spoke. Teresa was in the kitchen preparing lunch when Charlie burst through the door, snow dusting his shoulders. "Riders coming! Looks like Harding and his men." Teresa's heart sank. She had been expecting some move from Harding as the bank's deadline drew near, but not a direct confrontation. "How many?" she asked, already reaching for her coat. "At least 6, including Harding. Find Quincy and the others. Tell them to arm themselves but not to shoot unless absolutely necessary. I won't have bloodshed on this property." Charlie nodded and dashed back out. Teresa moved to the window, watching as 7 riders approached the main house. Victor Harding rode at the front, his expensive coat and hat a stark contrast to the working clothes of the men flanking him. By the time Teresa stepped onto the porch, Quincy had positioned himself at her side, Pete and the Reed brothers spreading out around the yard, rifles at the ready. Charlie took position at the corner of the house, young but determined. "Quite a welcome committee, Mrs. Crawford," Harding called as he reined his horse to a stop. "Anyone would think you were expecting trouble." "Just being cautious, Mr. Harding," Teresa replied evenly. "What brings you to Broken Spoke?" Harding dismounted with exaggerated leisure. "Thought I'd save you some embarrassment. The bank's deadline is almost upon us, and we all know you can't meet it. I'm here to make a final offer for this property enough to cover your debts and leave a little something for your journey back east." "That's very considerate," Teresa said, her tone making it clear she thought it was anything but. "However, Broken Spoke isn't for sale." Harding's false smile slipped. "Don't be foolish, woman. You're beaten. Ellsworth has already agreed to sell me the note once he forecloses. Then he'll be disappointed, because there won't be a foreclosure." "Is that so?" Harding took a step forward, causing Quincy to tighten his grip on his rifle. "And how do you plan to prevent it? Your improvements are commendable but hardly enough to generate the kind of money you need." Teresa lifted her chin. "My financial arrangements are not your concern, Mr. Harding. They become my concern when they affect my plans for this valley." Harding's pretense at civility was evaporating rapidly. "I've been more than patient, Mrs. Crawford, but my patience has limits. This is your last chance to leave with dignity." "And if I refuse?" Harding's eyes hardened. "Then things might get unpleasant. Winter's a dangerous time. Accidents happen. Fires start. Cattle disappear." The threat hung in the air like frost. Quincy moved forward, positioning himself more fully in front of Teresa. "That sounded an awful lot like a threat, Harding," he said, voice dangerously quiet. "And I don't take kindly to people threatening what's mine." One of Harding's men reached for his gun, but Harding held up a hand to stop him. For a long moment, tension crackled between the two groups, the only sound the soft huffing of horses' breath in the cold air. Finally, Harding stepped back. "Consider my offer. You have until Christmas Eve. After that, he let the sentence hang unfinished as he remounted his horse. As the riders departed, Teresa let out a shaky breath. He's desperate. And dangerous, Quincy added, watching the retreating figures. We'll need to double the guard on the herd and property. Teresa nodded, her mind racing. We need to speak with Ellsworth again. There must be some arrangement we can make. I'll ride into town tomorrow, Quincy offered. No. Teresa turned to face him, decision made. We'll go together, and we'll take the ledgers. I want to show him exactly what we've accomplished and what our projections are for spring. Later that night, after reviewing their finances for what felt like the 100th time, Teresa and Quincy sat before the fire in the parlor, the weight of their situation heavy between them. Even with everything we've done, Teresa said quietly, we're still short by nearly half. Quincy nodded grimly. And we've sold or mortgaged everything of value. Teresa leaned her head against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. Except the land itself? Which is what Harding wants? They sat in silence for a long moment, watching the flames dance in the hearth. Finally, Teresa straightened, a new resolution in her eyes. What if we offered Ellsworth a partnership instead of full repayment? Quincy looked at her in surprise. A partnership? Yes. He could convert the debt to a stake in the ranch, say, 20% of profits for the next 5 years. It would be less risky for him than foreclosure, which would leave him with property he'd have to sell in a depressed market. Do you think he'd go for it? Teresa considered this. He's a businessman. If we can show him that Broken Spoke is on the path to profitability, it might appeal to him more than the uncertainty of auction. Quincy smiled slowly, admiration clear in his eyes. You never stop fighting, do you? Not when something's worth fighting for. She reached for his hand. And this ranch, this home we're building together, is worth everything. The look that passed between them held all the words they hadn't yet said aloud of love that had grown from respect, of futures entwined, of hopes that extended far beyond the immediate crisis. Tomorrow, then, Quincy said, we'll ride to town and make our case. Tomorrow, Teresa agreed. The meeting with Ellsworth went better than either had dared hope. The banker, while initially skeptical, was impressed by Teresa's meticulous record-keeping and clear business plan. The improvements to the ranch, the diversification efforts, and the projected income from timber, wheat, and the spring calving all pointed to an operation on the rise. Mrs. Crawford, Ellsworth said after reviewing the ledgers, I must admit I underestimated your business acumen. This is quite thorough. Thank you, Mr. Ellsworth. Now, regarding our proposal. Yes, the partnership. The banker leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. It's unorthodox, to be sure, but potentially more profitable than foreclosure, Teresa pointed out. You'd be getting a stake in a diversified ranch with multiple revenue streams, not just a cattle operation vulnerable to market fluctuations. Ellsworth studied her thoughtfully. And what of Harding? He's made no secret of his interest in acquiring your property. Mr. Harding's interests are not aligned with the long-term health of this valley, Teresa said firmly. His methods of land management are extractive rather than sustainable. Within 5 years, he would deplete the soil and overgraze the land, leaving it significantly less valuable. The banker's eyebrows rose. You've given this considerable thought. I've given everything about Broken Spoke considerable thought, Mr. Ellsworth. It's not just my livelihood, it's my home and my future. After a long moment, Ellsworth nodded. Very well, Mrs. Crawford. I'm willing to accept your proposal, with one condition. And that is 25% for 3 years, rather than 20% for 5. I prefer a shorter commitment. Teresa glanced at Quincy, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Agreed. Shall we draw up the papers today? By the time they left the bank, Snow was falling again, gentle flakes that transformed the dusty town into something almost magical. With the signed partnership agreement safely tucked inside Teresa's coat, they felt lighter than they had in months. "We did it," Teresa said, unable to contain her smile as Quincy helped her into the wagon. "You did it," he corrected. "Your plan, your presentation, your vision." "Our vision," she insisted. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Quincy." He held her gaze, love evident in his eyes. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you, something I've been carrying around for weeks." Teresa's heart quickened. "Yes?" Instead of speaking, Quincy reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, worn velvet box. "This was my mother's. I've kept it all these years, never thinking I'd have cause to use it." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band set with a single pearl, modest but beautiful. "Teresa Crawford, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I can't offer you riches or an easy life, but I swear I'll love you and work by your side for as long as I draw breath." Tears welled in Teresa's eyes. "Oh, Quincy, yes. 1,000 times, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if it had been made for her, then pulled her close for a kiss that promised a lifetime of tomorrows. They married on Christmas Eve in the parlor of Broken Spoke Ranch, with Pete, Charlie, and the Reed brothers as witnesses, and the Mendoza family as honored guests. Teresa wore her best dress, adorned with sprigs of evergreen, and sang "Amazing Grace" as she descended the stairs to where Quincy waited by the fireplace, looking more handsome than she'd ever seen him in his one good suit. The circuit preacher, who had ridden 20 miles through the snow to perform the ceremony, spoke of love's endurance through hardship, of partnership in all things, and of homes built on foundations of respect and faith. As Teresa and Quincy exchanged vows, the first notes of dawn began to brighten the eastern sky. And when they stepped onto the porch as husband and wife, Teresa's clear voice rose in a morning song that celebrated not just the Christmas day, but the new beginning they had forged together. Broken Spoke Ranch, once neglected and nearly lost, had found its heart again in the widow who had brought order, love, and morning songs to a place that needed all three. And as Quincy Sutton gathered his bride in his arms for another kiss, he silently thanked whatever twist of fate had brought Teresa Crawford to his door that dusty summer day, changing both their lives forever.